All right, so for the last lesson of this unit, we're going to discuss circles. Yes, lines are related to circles, but this is our first shape that is our first geometric shape that is actually not a line. So let's kind of figure out all the little pieces and nuances of this thing. Now there's this diagram here. So as I'm going through and filling in all these blanks, I want you to keep looking back at this diagram and trying to find what we're talking about as we go on. So first up, a lot of it's going to be very familiar to you. Some of it will be a reminder. Let's go through it. So very first, we know that every circle has a circumference. The circumference of a circle otherwise known as C, is the distance around the entire circle. Okay? So if you cut it and then kind of laid it out flat, it'd be like the length of a line almost. Okay, now let's try again. The diameter, usually denoted with a D. So the diameter D is the straight line segment from a point on the circumference that passes through the center and touches on the other side. So it's a straight line that goes from one side of the circle to the other, but passes through the center. So this is going to be the maximum distance across the circle. Right? It has to pass through the center, of course, to be that maximum distance. Alrighty. But there's more. If you find half of that distance, the distance from the center to the circumference, this is called the radius. So the radius R is the straight line segment from the center to any point on the circumference of the circle. Doesn't matter what point, because it's all going to be the same distance. The radius itself is half the length of the diameter. So you can find the diameter by calculating 2 times r. You could also go the other way. The radius is half of the diameter. Either way. Now a chord, this is an interesting one. A chord is a line segment connecting any 2 points on the circumference. So we see an example of a chord down here that just touches any 2 points. Now the interesting question to ask is, does that mean the diameter is a chord? Yes, it is. In fact, it's the longest chord in any circle. It has to be. Now, there's this other line that we don't have described over here. This is called a tangent line. A tangent line is any line that has a single intersection point with a circle, which means it only touches at one little point and just keeps going on forever. So it's just kind of tapping the edge. It's like if you had a basketball and you laid a ruler on its edge. That exact point where that ruler lays on the edge of the basketball, that's the tangent of that basketball. All right, so every single circle that has its center located at 0, 0. Another way of writing that is it's located about the origin, where the origin is 0, 0. Okay, that's another way of saying that its center is at 0, 0. It has the equation x squared plus y squared is equal to r squared, where x and y is some coordinate, and r is obviously the radius of the circle. So we can use this knowledge to calculate a whole bunch of different things. So let's try and break some of those things down. A circle has the equation x squared plus y squared equals 9. Determine the radius and diameter of the circle. Well, we know the equation is r squared, x squared plus y squared equals r squared. So by looking at this, that means that r squared is equal to 9. So that means the radius is the square root of both sides. So the radius is simply the square root of 9, which is just 3. Great. So we know that. We also know that the diameter is equal to 2 times r. That means the diameter is equal to 2 times 3, which is just 6. So it's very easy to find key points of information about a circle if we have the equation. Okay. Let's take it one step further. Determine the equation of a circle that has its center at 0, 0. This is a must in order to be able to use this equation, with a diameter of 16 units. So that means its d is equal to 16. What does that mean the radius is equal to? Remember, the radius is half the diameter. So that means that the radius is equal to 8. But the equation is x squared plus y squared equals r squared. So what is r squared equal to? That means r squared is equal to 8 squared, which is equal to 64. So therefore, x squared plus y squared is equal to 64. That's the equation of that circle. Great. But wait, there's more. Of course there is. Let's do this again. So given the circle with the equation x squared plus y squared is equal to 49, let's state the following data. First of all, what are the coordinates of its center? Because it follows this equation exactly, we know that its center has to be at 0, 0. That's the rule. The equation for circles that are not at 0, 0 actually have a different equation. What is the radius of this? Well, since 49 is r squared, that means the radius is equal to root 49, which is just 7. Okay. What is the diameter? Well, the diameter is equal to 2 times the radius, which is equal to 14. What are the x and y intercepts? Well, that's pretty interesting, but it's not that hard when you think about it. If you know that the radius of a circle, which is located at 0, 0, has a radius of 7, that means if you go 7 away from the origin in any direction, you have the circle. Well, 7 from the center in the right direction is our x-intercept. One of our x-intercepts, because you could also go left. Oh. So that means our x-intercepts are actually located at an x component of plus or minus 7. The y will still, of course, be 0. So that's actually 2 different points. That's really 7, 0 and negative 7, 0. I just shortened it up to make the writing easier. Similarly speaking, for the y-intercepts, it's the exact same thing. Go 7 out because we have a radius of 7 and 7 below. So now we have the exact same thing. So now we have an x component of 0 and our plus or minus 7 for the radius. Now it says graph the circle. Well, we just put down 5 points. We put down the center, which is not on the circle, but it's part of the circle. And then we have our 4 x and y intercepts. So now we just need to connect the dots. Oops, that is pretty terrible. Let me try again. All right. That wasn't too bad. So that's our circle, and we're going to label it. Our label x squared plus y squared is equal to 49. Now we've labeled our full circle. We've figured out all the possible information we can find. That's pretty great. So let's move on. So the next question, we're going to apply it a little bit deeper. Determine the equation and the radius for the circle that has its center at the origin and passes through the point 6, -8. What this tells us is that this point is on the circumference of the circle. So if this is my circle that's located at 0, 0, somewhere over here, down here, is 6, -8. And I know that I can calculate the radius by finding the distance from the center, which is 0, 0, to 6, -8. Oh. So I can do the hard work, or I can simplify it even further. I don't need to actually calculate that distance using the distance of a line because I have 2 components. I have an x and I have a y. Well, if I'm trying to find the equation, which is just x squared plus y squared is equal to r squared, let's substitute this point into our equation. And then the only thing left is r, so we can actually calculate for r very easily. So we are going to sub our point, which is 6, -8, into the equation of our circle. X squared plus y squared is equal to r squared. So x, we put a 6, so that's 6 squared, plus -8 squared equals r squared. So 6 squared is 36. -8 squared, that's 64, is equal to r squared. So we have 100 is equal to r squared. But to get rid of the square, we have to take the square root of both sides. Now, we technically know the r squared right now. So this is actually enough to write out the equation, which was the first part, because the equation is x squared plus y squared is equal to r squared. But the equation also asks for the radius. So we got to take this one step further. So that means that r is equal to the square root of 100, which is just r is equal to 10. So we have that piece of information, and we have this piece of information. So with that, we can say, therefore, x squared plus y squared, which is equal to r squared, which is just 100. So there's both of our values that it required, the radius and the equation of our circle. Alrighty, so we can put a therefore for both of these. So we could say, therefore, r is equal to 10 as well. So given the equation x squared plus y squared is equal to 36, find any 5 points that lie on the circle. Any 5 points. Which points should we use? Well, we saw previously a little bit above that we can very easily find the x and y intercepts as long as we know the radius. Because the radius is always going to be that far away from the origin. So if r squared is equal to 36, that means r is going to be equal to 6. Sure, so we could do it like that. But we could also find x and y intercepts the same way we always have. If you think about a line, how do we find the x-intercept? We set y equal to 0. How do we find the y-intercept? We set x equal to 0. So we can do the same thing again. So let's try that. So let's say let's say x-intercepts. So to do this, we're going to set y equal to 0 inside of our equation here. So that means x squared plus 0 squared is equal to 36. So that means x squared is equal to 36. So x is actually equal to, now this is where a lot of people stumble, the positive or negative of root 36. Now you're like, well, why the positive or negative? Well, because if I have positive, so what is root 36? It is 6. So x is equal to positive or negative 6. If I have negative 6 squared, I get 36. If I have positive 6 squared, I get 36. So when we actually take the square root of both sides, it technically works for both. That's why we get both plus and minus 6 in this case. So that means we have, in this case, we have plus or minus 6, comma 0. So both of those values there. So there's 2 of our points. We can do the same thing for our y-intercept. Kind of looks like a y. So our y-intercept, we're going to set x equal to 0. And it's going to follow the exact same pattern. So we're going to say 0 is equal to y squared. Or sorry, 0. Let me back that up. I apologize. Pop, pop, pop. There we go. Go away. All right. 0 plus y squared is going to be equal to 36. And it's the same problem as before. We got to take the square root of both sides. So y is going to be equal to the positive or negative of root 36. Or y is equal to the positive or negative 6. So what that means is, again, we end up with, in this case, 0, comma, plus or minus 6. Now there's 4 points. But it has to have 5. Which one? Well, we can actually choose any point as long as that point is, if we think about this graph over here. If I choose an x value of 1, okay? Just choose any x value that's less than the radius. Because if I choose an x value that's greater than the radius, I'm outside my circle. But if I choose any x value that's smaller than my circle, the circle has a y value for that corresponding point. So if I choose, let's say, for example, x is 1, the y component of the circle is somewhere up there. So x1 is here as well as down here. So when x is 1, the circle is actually at 2 separate locations. Similarly speaking, if I chose something like, I don't know, 5, that would mean the y component is here and it's down here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to choose an x between plus or minus the radius. Any x, doesn't really matter which one. So choose an x between plus or minus the radius. So if the radius is 6, that means it's going to be between -6 and +6. It doesn't really matter where you choose. And then we're going to take that number and we're going to sub it into our equation and calculate what the y component will be for that x that we chose. So let's say we choose, I don't know, let's say we choose x of 1. Okay? So that means for x, I'm going to put 1 squared plus y squared is equal to 36. So I take the square of 1, that's just 1. So y squared is equal to 36 minus 1. So y is going to be equal to the plus or minus the square root of 35. So we've actually found 6 points, really. But just choose one of these ones because it only asks for 5. So that means when x is a 1, then the y is going to be the square root of 35. Plus or minus the square root of 35. But we just found 6 points for this. Nice. All right. The last type of question that you're going to see for this basic idea of a circle is, given some point, I want to know, so if I have a circle, and given some point, I want to know whether that point is outside the circle, inside the circle, or on the circle. All right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take that point, and we're going to do a left side, right side check with our equation, and we're going to determine whether the left side is less than, greater than, or exactly equal to our right side. And that's going to tell us everything we need to know. So if this is our equation, x squared plus y squared is equal to 5, our left side is our x squared plus y squared. And we are going to, and our right side, sorry, is just 5. So now we're going to substitute our point here. So we have 0 squared plus root 5 squared. Okay? Now when we keep calculating, root 5 squared is just 5. What we see here is that the left side is equal to the right side. So what this means is that this point, 0 root 5, is actually on the circle. So since left side is equal to the right side, therefore 0, root 5 is on the circle. So here's the gist of it. If the result is greater, so that means if left side is greater than the right side, so if the result is greater than the radius, then that means the point lies outside the circle because it's too far. It's bigger than the radius. If the point is less than the radius, that means it's smaller than the radius. That means it's inside the circle. And if it's exactly equal to the radius, that means it's on the circle itself. So let's do one last question to basically emphasize this point. Determine whether 4, -2 lies outside, inside, or on the circle with the equation x squared plus y squared is equal to 25. Show your work and explain your answer. So we're just going to do a left side, right side check and give a final concluding statement that specifies why we came to the conclusion that we did. So left side. So we're going to substitute our 4, -2 in there. So that's going to be 4 squared plus -2 squared. And on the right side, we just have 25. So we have 4 squared, that's 16. Plus -2 squared, that's 4. So this gives us 20. Now 20 is less than 25. So we can say the left side is less than the right side. So since the left side is less than the right side, we know that it is inside the circle. Therefore, our point, 4, -2, lies inside the circle. And that's it. That's the entire circle lesson. So this one's nice and straightforward. We're going to definitely expand upon that later. But for now, this is everything you need to know. See you in class.